My name is Caitlin Baggott Davis, and I serve on the City Club Board of Governors as the president-elect. It's really a joy to be here with such a great audience this evening for such a consequential topic. I hope everyone in our audience this evening has a warm and safe place from which to enjoy this evening's conversation. If you're just joining, please add your name in the chat and see what other people are talking about. We've created a longer than typical format for what is certainly one of the most important issues facing our city this evening. I'm really glad to be here with everyone. Major cities throughout the United States have been experiencing a long-standing crisis in homelessness. And it's been about 19 months since voters in our region passed the historic Here Together initiative, which was the nation's largest ever tax measure dedicated entirely to homelessness services. New revenue from this measure just began flowing to service providers in July of this year. And that's why I'm so thankful to have our 5 guests joining us tonight to discuss what are the plans in our region for housing people, and when can we expect to see substantial decreases in the number of those who are living unsheltered throughout our region? A question that I think feels especially pressing on nights as cold and wet as this one. Before we begin, I want to acknowledge that the land we're on is native land and was stolen from the people who live here for thousands of years. Here in the Portland region, this land is the territory of the Multnomah, Kathryn, and Clackamas, the Tualatin, Kalapuya, and Molalla, the Wasco, Cowlitz, and many other Indigenous people who've known the power and beauty of the Columbia and Willamette Rivers, lived here, raised their families, and built communities and traditions that live on today. Together, we recognize their unbreakable connections to this land, and we honor the resilience of their ancestors and the hope of future generations. Thank you. Okay, a quick overview of this evening's conversation. I'm going to start off with a brief overview of the topic with Angela Martin, who's the new-ish executive director of the Here Together Coalition. After that, we'll move on to a panel discussion, really kind of an open conversation with Multnomah County Chair Deborah Kafoury, Washington County Chair Kathryn Harrington, Metro Councilor Christine Lewis, and the Public Policy Director of Central City Concerned, Mercedes Elizalde. During the panel discussion, we'll request that our audience remain muted, but feel free to share comments and questions in the chat. With one quick note on our community guidelines. City Club upholds a really high standard for our community for creating spaces where everyone feels welcome. No hate speech or bigotry or ad hominem attacks are accepted in our forums. And any guest who shares language or messages that are harmful or feel offensive will be removed. At about 6:30 p.m. after our panel conversation, we're going to move to a small group breakout, about 15 minutes for our members and guests to talk with fellow community members before our live Q&A at the end of the program. We're going to get started with Angela Martin. Angela, welcome. It's so good to see you here. Angela, you are the somewhat new executive director of Here Together, which is a regional coalition of elected officials, homeless service providers, business leaders, and community advocates who, as I understand it, developed a policy approach, a revenue method to support it, passed a ballot measure in the middle of a global pandemic, and are now supporting the implementation of that work. Do I have that all right?
You have that all right, and that explains why I feel a little tired.
Can you talk a little bit more about what this coalition is?
Definitely. As you mentioned, the Here Together Coalition spearheaded and passed a ballot measure dedicated to revenue for homeless services. And we're a big tent coalition representing over 150 organizations that don't always sit at the same table. And Caitlin, that's part of our strength. We come to this work from different perspectives, but with the same goal. Securing the resources and community support necessary to ensure that everyone has a safe place to sleep. The voters of the community stood together to say yes for a future where homelessness is rare and brief, and we continue to work toward that as a big tent coalition because we recognize that securing the funds was step one, and there's much more work we all need to do now to make that future a reality.
You said that this table isn't people who always sit at the same table together. At this moment of incredible political polarization, can you talk a little bit about what that's like?
It's where the important conversations and work happen. Look, just recently, 3 weeks ago, we reconvened as a coalition to say we recognize that more needs to happen now, and we want to be part of crafting proactive, proven solutions. So, in our coalition of 150, we drafted a series of recommendations, near-term policy proposals. That conversation didn't start and end without some disagreements. We had to talk about how we, the problems that we saw, why we thought they were, and what we were all going to do together. But we did it and did all the wordsmithing. And now we have next week recommendations that we'll be releasing to the public, where over 170 very prominent organizations, business leaders, community leaders have signed on to say, yes, we will start working together more than we have been because the crisis is happening now and needs our response.
So what I hear in there a little bit of a shift over the last couple of years, or a pivot coming up. I guess the question I was about to ask you next is, how do you think the work is going? Maybe they're related to each other.
Yeah. How's the work going? Every day, there's another success to celebrate. And in fact, you can actually keep tabs on this by signing up for our Happening Now biweekly newsletter. We want you to know that there are new transitional housing opening up every day, every week. People are being connected with services that will help them find health and stability. The pace of change is increasing and will continue as new resources make their way to people who so desperately need housing. And yet, Caitlin, I understand why there are more than, almost 300 people logged on to this program, because we're all deeply concerned about the humanitarian crisis on our street. And we want answers about what's being done to house our unsheltered neighbors. We all have a role to play in that. So here's what I hope happens tonight. I hope people leave here today with a better sense of what's happening, more confidence that change is taking place, and a renewed commitment to be part of the solution. Because while frustration and anger are understandable, those emotions don't solve complex problems. It is coming together, making a commitment to work as a community. That's what's going to solve our big, complex problems. So I'm looking forward to hearing from our panelists tonight.
I am as well. I've got just a couple more questions for you on the coalition side of things. I'm glad that you mentioned frustration, because I don't think I'm alone in feeling like on a weekly, if not daily basis, I talk to a friend or a colleague in the community who's frustrated, right? And you and I have talked about this in the past, so we don't have to pretend that we don't know each other. I think that some of the frustration comes from not fully understanding the work as it's moving forward in the pace of change. And it sounds like this new newsletter that you've launched is a response to that, and trying to help people stay abreast of this complex work as it's moving forward. Other than this newsletter, where are there places that members of the community can get more informed about what's happening, and particularly what's happening in the neighborhoods where they live and work?
I think there are a number of places to plug in. Obviously, I'm going to suggest people sign up not only for our newsletter, but get onto our digital channels. We do make every effort to not only let you know what's happening, but invite you into opportunities to be part of the solution. And I think I keep saying that because I know it's where it needs to happen. So just last week, we sent out our newsletter, and I got a bunch of folks reading back and saying, oh, I want this in more bite-sized chunks so that I can go on to my community newsletters, to my next door neighbor, and help them understand where they can volunteer, where they can plug in, and celebrate success. Yeah. So that's part of what we do, is not only give you information, but give you information that you can share with others, inviting them into the solution set, inviting them into being champions for all the work that's happening.
Awesome. Really great to hear that. I think when working in politics over the course of the last 20 years, a coalition of 150 organizations and organizations across a wide range of sectors is pretty unusual. And it's great to see such a robust response, and also recognize that for a lot of Portlanders, they won't ever touch any of those organizations, and finding new channels to connect with them is so important. I want to ask you one more question before we pivot to the panel. As I was scrolling through the Here Together Coalition website this evening, which, by the way, Angela, you should totally put that in the chat for everybody. One thing I noticed was a fact check piece on the website that more than 5,200 adults and children will sleep outside or in a homeless shelter tonight, which is heartbreaking as a number on its own. I also have recently learned that the 2021 point in time survey was delayed because of COVID, which is also understandable. Can you talk just a little bit about how we know how many people need help right now, particularly when so many people are housing insecure because of the economic crisis that went along with COVID?
Let me come at this a different way. First off, the numbers that we quote are from the last available surveys.
Yeah.
And the number of people that are homeless, two things I want to point out. First, it is an ever fluctuating, and it is not the same person. Yeah. I mean, that is one of the complications of sharing success, is because it's hard to see, and I think one of our panelists, Mercedes, said this to me recently. It's hard to see someone who's no longer homeless because we've moved them on. So seeing the success becomes very difficult. But knowing the number and understanding the problem we have to solve, obviously, top of mind. So instead of looking at a once a year or every other year snapshot, our community has decided to move to a more real-time, data-driven approach. And I think perhaps some of our panelists will share this. We all have a desire to understand what the problem is at hand and what it's going to take to bring solutions to the individuals. And I think that's the other takeaway, is that there are big numbers, but in that is individuals who all have a different path out of homelessness. So I look forward to hearing more from our guests and continuing this conversation.
Well, Angela, thank you for helping us set the stage for this evening's conversation. I think the context of the size and the complexity of the coalition, the depth of work that's gotten us to this moment, and also the reality that things are continuing to shift and that there are new ways to learn about and get involved are all really helpful starting places for our conversation this evening. Okay. We're going to shift gears and move to a conversation. I'm hoping a candid and engaging conversation among our group of 4 leaders who've been working hard to bring forward solutions in this space. And I'd like to start by asking each of you to offer brief opening thoughts and introduce yourselves. And also, please share one topic that you hope we'll get to in our conversation tonight. I'll be taking notes. Let's start with Metro Councilor Christine Lewis.
Thank you so much, Caitlin. Thanks for organizing and hosting us here at City Club tonight. This is a really important conversation, and I'm honored to be here. Again, my name is Christine Lewis, and I use pronouns like she and her, and I serve on Metro Council representing District 2. That's the areas of deep Southwest Portland all the way into Clackamas County, areas like Lake Oswego, West Lynn, Oregon City, Happy Valley, Gladstone, Milwaukee, and parts of unincorporated Clackamas. I've served on Metro for 3 years now. And in the past 3 years, since the 2018 ballot, we have done a lot at Metro for housing. We've said yes on housing at the ballot twice. First in 2018 on the same ballot I was elected in, and then again just last year. So we've said yes twice to housing for an agency that's not known or doesn't have historic roots in housing as our responsibilities. When you think of Metro, you think of an organization that deals with transportation and land use planning, with managing the zoo and the expo center to make sure that we have economic growth and tourism in the region, and we manage our regional park system. We make this place great. But we can't do all of that if we're not planning across jurisdictional boundaries to make sure everybody has a safe place to call home at night. So that's why we've risen to the challenge that the public has asked us to step up to with 2 measures on housing. The first one, our bond, so that builds out housing that's affordable to our neighbors who need that the most. And then the second one, the supportive housing services. And those 2 measures have to work in tandem, because you can't give somebody services and expect them to find a place to live if we still face this crisis that we have of not enough affordable units in this region. That's why the 2 have to talk to each other. Metro is running what we're calling a startup operation. We're not trying to duplicate or reinvent the wheel on services that the regional housing authorities already do and already do very well. So we've got less than a dozen people who are managing our housing programs. There are analysts who are very adept at how money and IGAs work. They're very adept at making sure that we are moving forward on data and analysis. But we are trusting the local jurisdictions who have been doing this work to continue to partner as we make sure that these resources hit where they need to be on the ground. The homeless crisis is a culmination of multiple crises: wages and poverty, discrimination, mental health, and addiction. Every single person who comes into homelessness comes with their own story, and it's going to take their own story to get out. We need to resource people who can go meet them where they're at and help them along their journey. For far too long, we've had a one-size-fits-all system. We've been under-resourced, and we've treated the homeless crisis as simply an urban issue and not realized that homelessness exists and can look slightly different, might need different things, but it exists in the suburbs and the rural communities as well. There's more pieces of the puzzle out there than what Metro's touching. You know, we're touching building out the affordable housing, and then we're working on the supportive housing services. And the supportive housing services measure is specifically aimed at the chronic homeless community and folks who are at risk of becoming part of the chronic homeless community. There are other populations coming into homelessness every day, and they're just as important to serve. So I hope that we talk about how all of these pieces fit together to make sure that we're targeting our resources and making the most of this opportunity we have. We have a 10-year measure to really make sure that we're resourcing at scale. And I'm really glad to be here tonight with 3 of the partners that we're working with to get this done. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Councillor Lewis. Let's definitely return to that topic of how all the pieces fit together, because it is really complex. Mercedes Elizalde, as the Public Policy Director for Central City Concern, I'm hoping that you can go next, and that you can also give us a little bit, for folks in the audience who don't know about Central City Concern, a little background on your work there.
Yes, thank you so much. It's really great to be here tonight with all of you. Thank you so much for taking the time. So as the Public Policy Director at Central City Concern, again, my name is Mercedes. I use she and her pronouns. And my job is really to collaborate with our government partners or community organizations and advance policies that support Central City Concern's mission. Central City Concern serves about 13,000 people every year through our 12 federally qualified health centers. We have over 2,000 units, about 2,200 units of affordable and supportive housing. We also have a job placement center where we support about 1,200 people a year in getting back to work. We operate social service programs for community justice in Multnomah and Clackamas County. And I really work on looking at the intersections of policy analysis, advocacy, and public education and coalition building, right? That work of where we're finding how we're all doing this together. In our efforts, we're really focused on 4 very core issues. We want to see our community safely housed, healthy, economically resilient, and socially connected. And we strive to build an integrated systems approach to solving homelessness, both within Central City Concern, but also in the broader community. We want to see folks served and supported regardless of where they get their help and assistance. Central City Concern has a particular focus on folks who have complex health needs, substance use disorder, mental health, and physical health needs. And we know that taking that integrated approach and pairing housing, healthcare, social services, economic attainment, when you pull these things together and you really support somebody through that, that's when you find the greatest amount of stability. Today in this conversation, what I'm hoping folks walk away from is one, that today hundreds of people were housed. hundreds of people moved into housing. Thousands even, maybe if we start looking broader than just the area that I know of. But also hundreds, maybe thousands of people experience their first night of homelessness today. And part of the work that we're doing here is not just how we respond to what happens when folks are already experiencing homelessness, that work that Central City Concern does, but I hope that we also start talking, as Commissioner Lewis said, about that larger piece about what is it that caused folks to experience homelessness for the first time today, and how do we stop those new instances of occurring? Because when we're able to do that, when we're able to pull together both a cohesive and strong response system, and we're also able to really invest in prevention, that's when we'll see the future, the new societal conditions that simply do not allow for the kind of homelessness that we see today. Thank you again for having me here today. Looking forward to the conversation.
Thank you, Mercedes. Next, Washington County Chair Kathryn Harrington. Please introduce yourself and kick us off.
Thank you, Caitlin. I'm really so excited to be here. Hello, everyone. Good evening. I'm Kathryn Harrington, the elected chair of the 5-member Washington County Board of Commissioners, who also serve as the board of directors for Clean Water Services, combined with over 2,700 employees and $2.1 billion in budgets total. Now, those 4 colleagues of mine have, just since July, been working full-time on behalf of our community. So it's a new day at Washington County. We've really focused on one major priority this year, and that has been expanding the availability of affordable housing and our network of important wraparound social services, working together to help create housing stability for all Washington County residents. So here goes with some of the great things happening in Washington County in very close collaboration with our county partners at Multnomah County, Clackamas County, and at Metro. With the community support of Metro's housing bond and supportive services levy, we can finally make an impactful community difference by addressing the complexity of issues related to homelessness. We've partnered with community-based organizations at a level unlike we've ever done before. And these CBOs, our community-based organizations, are hiring staff to help our most vulnerable neighbors move into housing and help prevent people from becoming houseless in the first place. These 17 organizations are delivering culturally specific and culturally responsive support, a first for us. Individuals are making the transition into permanent housing with the help of case managers and long-term rental assistance. Our goal is to secure 500 permanent housing placements by the end of this current fiscal year. Our bridge and winter shelter programs help individuals and families with short-term shelter as they work with case managers to find permanent housing. We've already met our year 1 goal of providing 100 shelter beds that are available year-round across the county. We didn't have that before. We have 2 new affordable housing complexes that just recently opened. First, the Viewfinder in Tigard, developed by community development partners. That's providing 81 new homes in the heart of the Tigard Triangle, serving individuals and families with 10% of the apartments reserved for veterans. Second, the Mary Ann, named in honor of Beaverton's first school teacher, includes 27 family-sized apartments, with 20% set aside for families with extremely low incomes. I want to send congratulations to Reach CDC and the City of Beaverton for creating these 54 affordable homes in the heart of their downtown. Next fall, the Valfrey in Forest Grove will open with 36 affordable homes for families, with 8 apartments set aside for our most vulnerable community members who will receive permanent supportive wraparound services. Looking ahead at our construction pipeline, thank you, Metro. we're making progress on building 13 affordable apartment complexes that will open by the summer of 2024, all funded through Metro's voter-approved housing bond. In addition to building these new units, we are also preserving hundreds of existing affordable housing stock located at county housing authority properties, with an emphasis on accessibility and long-term affordability. The County Housing Authority manages over 650 additional affordable apartments and provides about 3,000 housing vouchers for individuals to affordably rent in the private market. Another initiative we've launched is the Encampment Management Program. It's a one-year pilot program that provides support where individuals are living, thus reducing the spread of COVID while simultaneously having service providers help individuals transition to stable housing. I'm proud that we center the needs of our community as we address homelessness. And I'm thankful for the many organizations that have stepped up to the plate to join us in this work. This is yet another example of where strong community partnerships play a vital role in our approach. As we build out these new housing and supportive services program, we're keeping several principles at the forefront of our work. And I want to mention just a couple today. First, we're leading with racial equity. Decades of social discrimination in the housing market result in disparate outcomes for Black, Indigenous, and people of color still today. We have decades of work. And as we're building out our programs, we're committed to leading with racial equity at every step. And last, investing these public resources in approaches that are effective and innovative in addressing the crisis head on. And HereTogether is doing a great job of helping amplify how we're doing that. Washington County is committed to our public stewardship of the voter-approved funding measures to make sure we're making as big an impact as possible for the housing needs across our community. I hope this overview helps convey our sense of confidence that we're headed in the right direction. Your participation this evening tells me that you care for one another, and care for our collective community. So thank you for playing a role to help tackle this crisis. And may the next year ahead, 2022, be a year of hope, resiliency, and making a difference by our working together. Thank you, and I'm looking forward to your questions.
Chair Harrington, thank you. That was a lot of information, and I'm sure we're going to come back to a
we're doing so much good stuff.
You are. It's great to hear. A couple of quick notes before we go to Chair Kafoury. One, I see so many good questions in the chat and really appreciate everybody engaging so deeply. And please be assured your questions won't be lost. When we come back to the Q&A, I'll be going through that for questions. And I also really appreciate folks like Angela who are weighing in with answers as you have them. My other quick note is for our members of our audience, please be sure that you're on mute, and whoever is driving, I hope you're driving safely and that it feels great to listen to City Club like the old days while you're driving. And Chair Kafoury, let's hear from you, and then we'll move to our broader conversation.
Thank you. And I was pleased to hear that whoever was driving was using their turn signals. I've noticed that has not been quite the norm on the streets these days. Anyway, thank you so much, everyone. Thank you for being here tonight. Thank you for having us. I'm Multnomah County Chair Deborah Kafoury. I use she and her pronouns. And I'm really honored to be here along with my partners, Councilor Lewis, Chair Harrington, Mercedes, and Angela. You guys are doing wonderful work in the community. And I'm actually really grateful that we have this time tonight to focus on and to clarify the work that's happening right now in our communities to get people into housing, to move people closer to housing, and to keep people housed. Because although the frustrations and the noise might grab the headlines, On the other side of that is an incredible amount of work being done by people and organizations who are fiercely dedicated to helping our neighbors surviving outside, helping them get what they need to move closer to what is going to end their homelessness. And I use those words purposefully. They are our neighbors, and they are surviving outside at this moment. Folks in our community are also working at the same time to help people that are right on the edge, to help them from falling into homelessness. And what we all are up against is formidable. A crisis of housing affordability and homelessness, decades in the making, which has only worsened over the 20 months of a once-in-a-lifetime pandemic that has disrupted public spaces and the normal flow of people throughout the community. It's only intensified the visibility of people having to live their private lives in full public view. For years, our response as local governments and service providers has been hamstrung by not enough money, not enough political will, and not enough community interest. But our systems adapted. They became more coordinated, and we made significant strides forward to serve people experiencing homelessness the best that we could under those circumstances. But thanks to a truly regional measure that so many community members and groups came together and worked very hard to pass, with funds that we've had in hand for less than 6 months, but will keep coming for the next 10 years. We've finally been able to get our foot through the door of a wide-scale response to this crisis, and it demands one. We've listened, we've learned, and we have built to get to the point where we finally have the tools to make a transformative difference across our Tri-County region, one life at a time. And now is not the time to get distracted or bullied or dark moneyed into repurposing those new means back into small-time solutions that not so subtly are meant to move people from some neighborhoods to other neighborhoods. What it is time for now is to make good on what the historic measure was designed to do. This measure was shaped by countless community members, including so many people who have experienced homelessness themselves and voted for by hundreds of thousands more. The work that we're finally able to do now expands and creates new entry points to services, increases the support and resources that people can access right now to meet their most urgent needs, and of course makes housing that's connected to support services, it makes it so much more accessible and immediate than it has ever been. But like a lot of our most complex challenges, getting people from point A to point B isn't always linear, because at the heart of this crisis are real complex human beings who've endured incredible and are still enduring incredible hardship and trauma. Everyone that is doing the work made possible by the Supportive Housing Services measure is committed to staying focused on the talk that matters most. What our neighbors living outside tell us that they need, and how we can best meet them wherever they are to provide for their immediate safety, to help them move closer to life-changing stability and the safety that comes from having homes of their own. That's what these wide-scale efforts and solutions reflect, and that's what we're going to continue to pursue. So thank you again for having me tonight, and I look forward to having this discussion.
Wonderful. Thank you all. And I think we're going to move towards having all of our panelists on the screen together so we can have a little bit of a collegial scrum. I'm hoping for the next half hour of our conversation that the four of you will be in direct conversation with each other. I'm looking forward to a little bit more of an informal approach to this. But let me kick this off. Chair Kafoury, you talked about a problem decades in the making and a problem with a significant scale. There are a lot of different ways to think about the relevant scale and timeline of this crisis, a national crisis that we're experiencing here in our city. Chair Kafoury, can you start by talking a little bit about the indicators that you track and how you think about these questions of scale and timing and what we measure? And then would love to hear from everybody else as well.
Sure, and I think we've talked a little bit about it. It is hard to comprehend the scale because it is sands shifting under our feet. You don't see the people that we have gotten off the street on any given night in Multnomah County. There are 12,000 people who are sleeping indoors in their own bed with a lock, thanks to the work that has already been done and the money that we have already spent. But we know that there are many, many, many more who do need not just keys to an apartment, but they need the services provided. And we have really been, this has been a national problem. It's not just here in Portland, it's across our country. It's definitely highlighted in certain parts. I mean, we know the West Coast has been hit particularly hard. It's actually directly correlated to places in our country where rents have increased faster than people can keep up with them. It's not a surprise why people become homeless. Yes, it varies. It can vary by person, but we have not had the means as local communities to address the scale of the problem. In fact, even the point in time count, which we did not do last year because of the pandemic, that is going to occur next month in January, is not it's not a scientifically proven tool because it's volunteers going out on the streets. In fact, I would recommend if anybody wants to sign up to do it, please send me an email. I'll put my information in the chat. It is really, really informative and helpful. We take about 300 volunteers in Multnomah County to go out and count. And that gives us a sense of the people who are experiencing homeless. But again, some of those folks will get housed that night. Some of those folks, some people that we haven't counted will become homeless tomorrow. So it's an ever changing. I think the people want to spend a lot of time talking about how many people, and if we can just get those 4,000 people into housing, we're going to be done. And unfortunately, that's just not the case. We have to work on all fronts. We have to work to get the people that are sleeping on the streets tonight housed. We have to work to ensure that the people who, and there are many of them because of the pandemic, at risk of losing their housing, stay housed. And then we also have to work on all of the other issues around mental health, drug addiction, poverty, racism, and discrimination to ensure that tomorrow and next week and next year, more people don't become homeless.
I see a lot of nodding heads. Who wants to jump in?
Well, I just want to once again remind us that the voters of our 3-county region have chosen to invest to change this situation. And we are getting things going as quickly as possible. Some of what Chair Kafoury mentioned is reliant upon building the workforce and hiring all of the case managers, hiring more of those mental health specialists, so that as we have these housing solutions, people also have the services, the support they need to be successful, so they'll stay in that housing. But there's also a lot of trust building along the way, and we're working on that each and every day. We have people, workers, employees, case managers, community partners that are working with individuals each and every day to help them understand that this isn't punitive. This is enabling. This is being crafted to their individual personhood. It takes time. We're only 6 months now into this, but we're showing results already.
Thank you for talking about both of the fact that you're 6 months into having the resources to make change and what the work looks like. Chair Harrington, you mentioned a building timeline that included the year 2024. And I'm wondering if any of you could give us just a step through of 2022, 23, 24, the kind of impact outcomes that people in our region should be looking for. Are there benchmarks or milestones that we can be looking forward to?
Sure, I'll hop in and start from the Metro perspective, because I think I'll only be able to half answer the question. Because I think what's really important to know is that Metro is assessing the tax, collecting the tax, and then there are 3 counties that are doing the work on the supportive housing services. Multnomah County, Washington County, Clackamas County. So it is the counties who decide how to target those monies towards specific contracts and towards the specific populations that need to be served. But the work of Metro is to make sure that we're aggregating and making a single data set so that no longer are there gaps or holes of people who are moving between counties, and there's a consistency of service. For far too long, we've seen a lot of homelessness in downtown where there are service providers, because if you come into homelessness here in West Lynn, there's not a service provider in the entire city. You might end up then in Oregon City, and at some point you might get sent from Oregon City into Portland where there's more services. We've got to make it so that that is not basically kind of a regional pull into where there are services. There need to be services in your community. As it relates to Chair Harrington said the word trust, I think there's two kinds of trust here. It's the trust that we establish as government with the voters who have enabled us to do this work, but it's also trust amongst each other as we are figuring out who has different roles and responsibilities. And what I can come back to is the trust that we are earning from the housing bond, which remember was voted on 3 years ago. And here we are in November 2021, and we have 30 projects in the pipeline for 2,933 units. That's 75.2% of the way towards our regional goal of 3,900 units. And the pipeline includes 371 permanently supportive housing units, PSH units for short. And that is a unit that comes built in with wraparound services, a housing coordinator, somebody who can help deal with compounding issues. Maybe somebody needs a mental health or a substance abuse, or even just somebody to come in and coach. If you have a hoarding disorder, you maybe have been kicked out of 6 or 7 apartments because all of a sudden a landlord looks at you and says, you can't make an egress safely, you've got to move along. When the mechanism of just getting somebody in to coach you on making sure you don't continue to have a hoarding problem, making it unsafe to live in your unit, that's a whole lot less expensive for us to fund that one coordinator than to continue to rehouse you in new units. So that's why a PSH is so important, because it comes with all of that built in around people who need that kind of help the most. Not everybody does need it, but those who do absolutely need it. And for too long, we have put off serving that community at the depth that they need to be served.
I really appreciate you asking about trust. And Mercedes, I'm going to point this trust question back in your direction. Councilor Lewis talked about trust between voters and the elected officials who are moving these policies forward. And I'm also curious to hear about, and have seen a bunch of comments in the chat about trust in the houseless population for these services and the work that's being done, and solutions that it sounds like have been developed in partnership with people who are currently houseless. And I'm just wondering if you can talk a little bit about that side of things.
Certainly. I think trust is a huge part of this, because you're really kind of replacing what, for someone who's never experienced homelessness before, would be a family unit of support. And you're replacing that with community-based organizations, professionals, volunteers, a whole host of strangers, essentially, trying to replace that same function that for a lot of other people you may have without really thinking about it. And so it takes a lot of trust to move folks through different services and connect them with different providers. And one of the difficulties I think that we've had for a long time is that we assume that something is better than nothing. And that's why sometimes I think we make investments in small, short-term pilot programs that are meant to do something really quick, because we're just like, something is better than nothing. We got to get something out there. But what we've learned in doing more work, within Central City with our client advisory groups, within the larger community in the counties, with folks who identify as either currently or formerly experiencing homelessness, also contributing big surveys that we've done in the community, is that folks have very specific things that they would like to see invested in our community that would make things better. no one should be shocked that one of the biggest things is just help paying rent. And so that us being able to then deliver on that, and I think the supportive housing services measure is a huge step towards that, because an expectation of those dollars is to use a lot of them to just pay for folks being able to be into housing, whether that's subsidizing housing built with low-income housing tax credits or subsidizing private market housing. That is a big goal there. And that's how we show that we're listening, that we're not just trying to do something for the sake of doing something, but that we are responding to what people are saying is going to make the difference in their lives. And that takes time, and it takes patience, and it takes long-term commitment. Because if we start to veer off of that, if we start to change tactics and go back to just something, anything, we're going to lose the trust that we've built with the community who need these services and who have been asking for them. One of the things that I remember hearing so much when I was a case manager for my clients was this idea of like, I don't really need help if I could just, and then fill in the blank, right? If I could just buy a car, if I could just, pay off my cell phone bill, if I could just call my sister, if I could just, and people would fill it in with things that they felt like they could do in a short term. When realistically, so much of what they were dealing with were years, sometimes decades of trauma. Sometimes the road that led them to sleeping outside started when they were, 5 years old. And it takes a lot of also self-reflection to identify that you can change those other circumstances, that a road to stability is possible. But it does take a lot of trust, and not to sound too corny, but it does take love. You have to really love and care about your community to make these kind of long-term investments and long-term commitments to these solutions.
This phrase, if I could just, has a corollary on the other side that I'm sure that all of our elected leaders and also folks in the service providing side of this have heard. Why don't you just? I think for our City Club members and audience, all of us have been on the outside of really complex decision-making processes. And maybe sometimes all of us have been guilty of armchair quarterbacking the work as we saw it developing. We're human after all. For each of you, when you think back 2 years or 10 years, whenever it is that you became involved in this work, Chair Kafoury, 20 years, thinking back to what you didn't even know you didn't know about how to address homelessness, what's one thing that you thought would be or should be easy? What's that has turned out to be more complex than you understood and essential to solving the problem? And looking for sort of quick answers, right? What's the why don't they just that used to be in your mind that you now see as much more complex?
Well, I don't think, I'll just jump in here since I'm the oldest. So I you're laughing at me, Kathryn. I mean, sure. I thought that we could make a plan, and we could be very thoughtful, and if we did A, and then we did B, and then we did C, and then ta-da, we would be where we needed to be. So we first worked very hard to raise the level of interest in the public and raise awareness among other elected officials. I've been screaming housing for 20 years, and people would say, no, not housing, education. No, not housing, transportation. So finally, we, grabbed the public's attention and passed the Portland bond measure, get enough attention, pass the Metro bond measure, get more attention and more support and more advocacy. And we passed the supportive services measure. And all of these were in alignment to then have the resources, the public will, the political will to be able to do it. And then we had a pandemic. And then we have a new form of meth. And then we have a crisis in our behavioral health care system. I mean, it's just, I thought that there would be a linear path, and it has been anything but that. And I'm not talking about for individuals, I'm talking about for the planning purposes.
Anybody else want to weigh in, even if it's a quick thing?
Sure, I'll hop in. I first got deeply involved with housing about 6-7 years ago, and I was actually part of the campaign team that led the Portland bond. And I was very up on, we will have enough units to get people in. And it was only in the past few years that I've realized not only how important those services are to connect people to stability and staying in units. It's not just matchmaking. It's really needing to keep people placed, but also the challenge of integrating the healthcare system and our state's failing mental and behavioral health systems into that work. You know, we've couched for so long the failures of the federal government and why we're stepping up in place of federal government. And we often point to HUD, but just as much we need to be pointing to Medicaid and the services that are really housing services and our housing stability services, but we're not always seeing those dollars. And, you know, at Metro, we have no part in public health. The two chairs here know a lot about public health, and Mercedes knows a whole lot about it. Not trying to get Metro into it, but we need to be better at making sure that those dollars are in alignment and are fully flowing to make the most of our casework.
You know, one of the things that I love about Metro is that Metro reminds us that we can define big, audacious goals, and that these problems that we're facing as a community really do affect our entire urban and suburban communities. When I ran to be chair back in 2018, my opponent was in denial that we had homelessness in Washington County. That was only just over 3 years ago, folks. The global pandemic really brought the problem of homeless individuals to a much more present state in our communities. And thankfully, we have these supportive housing services funds and already underway the affordable housing bond measure with additional dollars to address the scale, well, at least some of the scale of problems that we have due to the exacerbation of challenges by the global pandemic. So I think that a lot of people out in Washington County are far more mindful of the fact that these aren't just Portland problems. These aren't just Multnomah County problems. These are our problems too. And so Chair Kafoury and Chair Smith in Clackamas County and I have been, and Chair Bernard before Chair Smith, have been meeting for 2 years. It used to be, you know, multiple times a week. Now we're able to be more planful and thoughtful in our delivery of services, but we're really trying to make sure we're working regionally. And Metro is helping us tell that regional progress story, because that's one of the things they do so well, is helping us not only develop the solutions across the region, but also tell that story of our progress and achievement in those big, audacious goals.
In a couple minutes, we're going to go to our breakout rooms where our audience members can talk with each other a little bit before coming back for our Q&A. I do have one last question I want to raise before we go to the Q&A. There is a citywide, if not region-wide, billboard and social media campaign right now that says that your efforts to address this issue have failed. And personally, I view that campaign as ill-informed and ineffective and pretty antisocial. I'm not going to ask you all to comment on it. What I want to know instead is, for City Club's audience of civic leaders who seek to be well-informed and pro-social and effective, what would help now? It's natural to feel frustrated and upset and even angry about this crisis. And as I listen to all of you talking, I think, wow, it's really complicated. I'm not sure what my role could possibly be in this work. Is there a concrete and helpful role for neighbors and shop owners and everyday people in helping to solve this issue?
I can give people some right now, and Mercedes can jump in as well. There's some things that you can do right now. And one of them is we are entering into the coldest, wettest part of our year, and we need people to help. We need winter gear. And it's easy as it's ever been to donate. You can go directly to 211info.org. We need people to volunteer at our shelters. This winter, as we have for the past several winters, we have a no turnaway policy on when certain criteria is met. So that means that we open up additional shelters. That also means we need people to staff those. And as you can imagine, it can be a challenging job. We need people to sign up. We need people to be trained in order to do that. So if you go to TPI Transition Projects website, you can sign up to go through the training. We need hundreds of volunteers because can be a 24/7. Last year it went on for days because of the ice. So we need people to donate, and we need people to sign up to volunteer. Mercedes, did you want to add?
I did, and I actually wanted to add something very different. I want folks to think about where you work or where you volunteer, where do you spend your time, and what is the housing commitment of those entities for you? So at your job, ask your HR department, do we deny people employment based on criminal records? Because that's how we perpetuate poverty. If you rent housing or you have a landlord, ask your landlord, do we deny people housing based on a past eviction? Are we saying that the very thing that they need is the very thing we're going to deny them? If you work in healthcare, asking your healthcare leadership, what is our commitment to not discharging people from our care into homelessness? We have a significant problem in so many different parts of our sectors, in the private sector, as well as all this response work that we're doing, right? So I'm actually asking, what can other folks do in the work that you do every day to not perpetuate this and not create those new experiences of homelessness? Let's not hold people's past against them forever. Let's find ways where we're all committed to a future where we have housing stability and economic stability.
I want to sparkle fingers or say yes to those two responses. There's, of course, a way to help if you cannot volunteer, if for whatever reason you don't have the time. Whatever resource you have, be it $5, be it $50, it is going to make a difference to some of these nonprofits doing the work as well. So you can volunteer, you can donate, you can also spend some of your personal energy and time working with people in your community to understand how best to help in your neighborhood. You're here at this forum, you're going to have new resources and bring that out to folks. And one of the things I really want to share out is Metro's responsibility around the solid waste system. A lot of the billboards that Caitlin referenced are trying to get people to equate the trash that we see on our streets with homelessness. But we know from picking up a lot of that trash that a lot of it, most of it, in fact, the majority of it is coming from housed people. So make sure to engage with your neighbors so that if you see a pile of trash, it's not only going to be because of somebody being unhoused. And of course, you can report and you should report when you see illegal dumping to our RID patrol. We got behind during the pandemic when we were not able to have full crews working together. We are staffed up. We have new crews. We've added crews. And that means we're now back to about a week and a half response time between receiving a report and getting a full crew out to a site to clean up. So that's a little bit of a side note, but it is important for people to know that something that makes them angry or brings this to mind because of the messaging they're receiving, there is a solution, there is a system, and just make sure to engage in it.
Okay, we're going to go to our audience breakout rooms. In your breakout rooms, these can be kind of awkward. You don't know who you're going to be with, but it's super fun. It's like being at a table at one of our City Club luncheons and you get to meet new people. So introduce yourselves, say hi, meet other Portlanders who care about things that you care about. And the question for your breakout group is, what more do you want to know about this topic? So when you all come back from breakouts, we'll have Q&A. And I believe Kayla is getting you all set up to go off to your groups. Welcome back, panelists. And I actually want to start with, let's see, Amy. I see you. I see your hand up, and you had a lot of questions in the chat during the event as well. Before we get started, I do want to remind everybody of City Club's question asking culture. We ask guests to ask a question in 30 seconds or less, and to remember that a question ends with a question mark. If what you're saying doesn't end with a question mark, that's a statement. All right. Amy, go for it. You got 30 seconds.
Okay, my question is, why are we using the more of the 1915 I plan that puts home care workers into housing supports to help clients stay housed? That's as best as I could do. Sorry.
Oh, you did great. Nice work. Who has an answer or a response for Amy's question? That was a pretty deep policy question.
It might be a little too in the weeds for somebody. For me to answer. I don't have the answer to it, so I'm happy to talk to my policy staff and get back to Amy if she's interested.
Awesome, Amy. If you could put that question in the chat, we're going to take all of the chat questions, which we definitely won't have time for this evening, and share them with our panelists after the event. Lori Palmer, I see you next. Lori, are you with us?
Yes, I am with you. I wasn't with you just a minute ago. I was going to do an icebreaker. I was the one that was all alone, and I was going to say I was traumatized. No.
Well, Lori, welcome. Do you have a question for our panel?
No, I'm going to let my panel go ahead and do my questions. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. All right, Allison, I see you next. Oh, you're on mute.
Thank you. Sorry. I have a question about the safe rest villages. You haven't mentioned them at all. And my sense of it, which may be incorrect, is that those are really on their way to becoming a thing. There's one planned for my neighborhood, and I'm thrilled about it. I have a lot of homeless friends. I have a big Doberman dog that I walk 3 times a day. And so I have met several people over the past 13 years who've become friends. So I would really like to know what's the progress on them. I can give you a history of why I'm interested, but that would take longer than 30 seconds.
Thank you, Allison.
I'll just jump in since Multnomah County and the City of Portland have been working very closely on the Safe Rest Villages, and the joint office, which, as you know, is a joint office funded by both the City of Portland and Multnomah County, is working in partnership with Commissioner Ryan's office to get these Safe Rest Villages off the ground. And I think I don't want to speak for Commissioner Ryan, but I will say that he has publicly stated that they've identified some of the 6 sites, not all of them, but that they will be opening sometime in 2022. Some of them sites have been easier to find than others, and then getting them set up and going. It is one piece of a very complex interwoven strategy that involves safe rest villages, congregate shelters, purchasing new motels, those sheltering folks in that way. And then, of course, ultimately the end goal, which is getting people into permanent housing.
Amanda Sharp, I see you next. What's your question?
This is Barb and Gary Sharp, and I just want to thank Caitlin and all the panelists for your presentation and your good work. Question is, are there partnerships with the major hospitals and the hospital systems in the greater Portland area when it comes to discharging patients who have no house to go to? So
if hospitals save money by discharging a patient and saving a couple of $1,000 a day, is there a collaboration opportunity there?
I'm happy to share a little from Central City Concerns perspective. So, and I'll actually give, I think, a little bit back to Amy's question, because now that I see it written down, I totally get what she was asking. And so on the beginning part, Central City Concern runs a program called the Recruitive Care Program that's housed at the Blackburn Center. And that is a hospital discharge program. So only hospitals refer into it. Our hospital partners pay for that program for those folks. And folks are typically being discharged for like a cancer treatment, minor surgery, major surgery. And they're expected usually to stay in those units for a couple of weeks as they're recovering. And they have a full suite of healthcare providers that are there with them 24/7 to support their recovery, and then work with that person to identify next step housing. We are very grateful to our state leadership, Representative Dexter, and many others who pulled together an American Rescue Plan Fund allocation for us to open up an additional site. There's a lot still in process there. It's not an immediate program that's going to be opening, but that's kind of longer term vision, which we're really excited about. And again, really appreciate state leadership around that. We have really benefited from a lot of investment from our healthcare community. Most recently, what we're seeing is the Oregon Health Authority considering a housing benefit in their 1115 waiver. So Amy, although they're not looking at the 1915I, they're looking at the 1115 waiver for creating a housing benefit. It's still in the concept phase, and I wish I do have it. I will pull up the OHA website and I'll drop that in the chat where you can go take a look at the concept paper, and you can even provide comment between now and I believe it's January 7th that they're accepting comment for that. And HealthShare, our local CCO for our region, has been a huge leader in developing the concept around that pilot. They were even prepared to do a lot of work around that. As they're working, helping the OHA really set up what that language can potentially look like. So I think that we've been saying, oh, someone dropped it in chat. Thank you so much, Shannon. So, I think we've been saying a lot, housing is health. And I think we are seeing a lot of healthcare entities start to step up and see some really strong collaboration on what we can do to, understand that folks who are having health complexities who don't have housing are some of the most vulnerable folks in our community.
I would just like to add real briefly that the Kaiser Foundation has been helping us here in our region, or at least both Multnomah County and Washington County, with what they call the Metro 300 program to try and ensure that we are reducing homelessness from our older community members. So thank you.
Super. I've got a question from the chat, and then I also have a question about the questions in the chat. How's that? So I'm going to start with the second one. An audience member just asked, what's going to happen to all the questions in the chat? There are more than 30. Would the four of you, if we sent you a Google Doc with all these questions, would you commit that your teams could respond in the next week? And then we'll send it out over email to folks. Awesome.
Well, I don't know about in the next week. We've got a lot of folks
it is
who've been working really hard during this almost 2-year global pandemic, and people need a break. So,
well,
by the middle of January, you betcha. Sorry, just got to take care of the employees.
That's great. That's great. So we will get responses to all the questions, or the majority of the questions, on a reasonable timeline and get it back out to people who signed up for this event. Okay, question from the chat. What kind of coordination among Western cities is occurring to address this challenge?
Not as a city councilor or a mayor, I will say that I know that the different organizations we have at the county levels, the National Association of Counties, and we are in close contact and sharing information. I think this is one of the issues that, when you asked, another thing that people think a myth busting or something like that is that somebody else has the answer, and we just need to go find it from them and implement it here. And that's not the case. But we are working closely together to try to influence the federal government, because they do need to do more. And I have seen a lot of questions in the chat about the federal government, and I would say, please, please, please reach out. If you're in a forum like this with your federal delegation, ask them where they've been on issues of housing and homelessness over the last 20 years.
Well, this is another great response to the pre-breakout room question of what people can be focused on and ways that they can be helpful, particularly for the City Club audience that really wants to help drive forward meaningful policy. It sounds like outreach to federal delegation might be important. Andrew Rowe, I see you with a question next.
Yes, I've been posting several ones that came up through our chat group, but thanks so much for taking my question. I guess I'll just pick this one, and that just relates to how are the counties focusing their efforts to accelerate transitional housing and safe rest villages. You already talked about a little, but in general, we know that permanent affordable housing will take several years to scale up to meet the entire amount of need. So what sort of transitional strategies can produce more immediate outcomes for more people in shorter time? Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. Who feels ready to jump in on
I've talked a lot. I'll let somebody else jump in, but I'm happy to if necessary.
Chair Kafoury, I think that's you.
Well,
go ahead, Kathryn.
I'll dive in the deep end here. I would question the several years part. We, as I mentioned, by the summer of 2024, we, as Washington County alone, will have ensured the construction of over almost 840 new homes that are permanently affordable housing. In addition, we have more people who are taking advantage of the housing voucher program to find stable housing and that long-term rent assistance that they need in private housing. So and we're not stopping going after not only state resources, but also federal resources as well. So we're just going to keep building and growing that program. And we're blessed to have the supportive services as well. Not everyone's going to need those supportive services together. It's just like we have a lot of people that need that leg up with affordable housing. But then after studies have shown that after 3 or 4 years, a lot of people have achieved what they need to, and they're moving on to market rate housing. So there is hope, I think.
Okay. Walt McKeskey, longtime City Club member, I think you get the last question of the evening. And folks who are still in line, please put your questions in the chat so that we can get them addressed on a reasonable timeline in writing.
Thank you, Caitlin. I think the two issues that catch the eye are the tent cities and the garbage around it. And Christine mentioned that a lot of the solid waste is not from the homeless camps, but brought in from the outside. So that leaves me to ask, does the Metro bond measure for housing services address solid waste and the human waste at campsites? And also, does Metro need to make some changes in its solid waste program to make sure this solid waste doesn't end up at these homeless sites?
Sure. Thanks for the great question, Walt. We actually did a budget amendment just this last June to dramatically shift how our RID Patrol works, not only staffing up internally as opposed to contracting out. We actually used to contract with Multnomah County Sheriff's Division to use inmate labor, and we are now bringing those teams in-house, both because we heard an ask from parts of the community that we divest from the carceral system, but also because with all of our teams either under our control or our direct contract, we're able to better serve community. That's not only folks who are at the same neighborhood every week and get to know the neighbors there, it's also folks who have better systems of training to interact with homeless folks and help make sure that when we're at a site, we know what is trash and what is somebody's still chosen possessions. So I do believe we are doing better by our RID Patrol. And again, the RID system is dependent on folks when they see illegal dumping, making a call or using the computer form to input that data into our go visit list.
Great. Kathryn, Deborah, Mercedes, Christine, thank you so much for giving generously of your time this evening and for your incredible leadership in this work. I've heard this evening that the work is not yet done and it's going to take more time, and that there are clear roles and ways that our members and members of the community can participate now as volunteers, which are urgently needed in these cold months, driving forward policy to get federal support and increased federal support to address this work, which is a national issue that's taking place here in Oregon. And also a deeper understanding of the complexity of this issue. As president-elect of City Club, I also want to take a moment to recognize that during the last 18 months of this pandemic, City Club has hosted our events free and open to all members of the public. We've had 30,000 people participate in our events in the last 18 months, and we're about to kick off our 2022 season of State of Events and candidate debates. We cannot do this work without the support of our community. We did a membership drive last month and had a 20% increase in members, which we're very proud of, and want to ask everybody in the audience today to consider membership at City Club so that we can have these kinds of programs on an ongoing basis, and really hope in next year that we can move back to having time together in spaces around the city. Thank you all so much. Really a pleasure to be here with you this evening. Take care. Stay warm.
Thank you.